Hi, welcome to the archives. So this is part two of the original blog that was called Fear Over the Centuries, which I originally posted in February of 2018. It was posted on February 18th of 2021. So part one of it I recorded earlier, and this is part two. I'm going to break it down into two blogs because it was a little bit long. So this one is called Shame Sliding Over Them, Accumulating on You. So in Affective Economies, independent feminist researcher Sara Ahmed, she wrote this in 2004, she connects fear with phobias in the socio-political context, right? So in this text, Ahmed describes fear as an object that flows within an economy across both social and psychic fields. What does this mean? This means fear becomes something. Think of the coronavirus isn't a virus, right? But obviously it's invisible. Ahmed is essentially arguing that fear, not like a virus, but not unlike a virus, is invisible. It too is an invisible object that circulates around, right? It's in the air. It's around in the socio-political, meaning politicians will use fear to get votes, right? So around the 2016 election, there's a lot of discourse, there's a lot of chatter around one of the candidates using fear to rally votes, and I'm sure you've read or heard or have engaged in that conversation yourself. Across psychic fields. This also means basically psychic fields, you can't see it, right? It's like a psychic. Psychics just know things. They don't know how they know. They tap into this like world that is invisible. Same. So it's like spiritual, it's energetic. Fear becomes this thing that you can't necessarily see, but you can feel as an emotion, right? You can express it. It's intangible. It's not material. So, man, I said I'm really trying to work on the ums and the uhs. Sara Ahmed further adds that the object of fear slides over and passes by particular bodies. Okay, so again, think of this invisible thing that's circulating around the environment. Ahmed says that it slides over some people. Specifically, she says it slides over white people. Let's just keep it very real. So Sara Ahmed in the article, she says fear slides. It's kind of like Matrix. You know when Neo does a little back thing? That's what happens with fear and white people. White people do the Neo thing and they're like, whoops, swerve. Only they don't do it. It's almost like fear is the one that says, no, we're not going to touch them. And Ahmed goes on and says, however, fear, while it slides and passes over white British nationalists, so she's writing in the context of Britain and the UK, even though she was born in Australia, I believe she later migrated and does a lot of her work in the UK. So she's speaking from a British perspective. So Ahmed says fear slides over white bodies and then it accumulates and sticks on people like me, on black folks, on brown folks. In this context, she's speaking specifically to asylum seekers and like immigrants, right? So while it slides and misses certain British nationalists, in passing by these white male bodies, it was also gender. She's talking about white men. So she says that while it passes over these white male bodies, this then gives them increased social, cultural, and financial mobility, meaning they're able to move upwards, which grants them access to more privileges that essentially leverages their ability to move up in social ranks. What does this mean? If you're not accumulating as much fear, if you look at some of the past posts I did on fear just now, let's talk about Netflix's Mo, right? So if you as an individual don't feel fear on an everyday basis, you're not afraid, that means you're very, like, you can still have depression because fear is not the only indicator of depression, but likely your mental health might be better than somebody else who is inundated with fear all the time, right? If you're living in a war zone and your nervous system is always dysregulated and you're in fear, that you're not going to be able to operate and function the same as somebody who's very safe in their home or their neighborhood, has a job, they have financial stability, they feel safe financially, they feel loved in their homes. There's a certain quality of lifestyle that you are going to have that somebody else who might be in way much more fear, who is living in fear of death, who is living in fear of being shot, who is afraid of losing their job, who is afraid of losing a loved one because they have cancer and are sick. If you are constantly inundated by fear, again, fear is linked to social class. You might have a lower quality of life. You may be living in poverty. You may be unemployed. That increases your risk of chronic disease, increases mental health. It's going to increase your stress. Your quality of life is going to be different. So what she's saying here is if fear is missing by so many of these white men, the chances are that their standard of living might be higher than an immigrant or an asylum seeker. Again, this is not to say that white people don't have poverty, that white men don't have issues, that they don't have mental health. That's not at all what she's saying. She's saying the chances are the two are not the same, right? If fear is missing by you on a constant basis and accumulating on somebody else, your realities might be completely different. You have two completely different realities, is what Ahmed is saying. Again, I'm just drawing on her work. So this then stands in stark contrast with a racialized person who might be black or brown and who might be an asylum seeker, a refugee, or an immigrant, right? Because if you are constructed as a terrorist, who people are supposed to be afraid of you, guess what? That really messes up your standard of living because you can't move around the same way. You're going to constantly be stopped at airports if you're traveling. That's going to stress you out or even just piss you off. Right? If you have to get stopped every time you're at the airport traveling, if this happened to white men every single time, as a white man, every time you got on a plane, you went to the airport, they stopped and searched you every single time, that's going to piss you off. That's going to make you very mad. Right? That's going to increase your blood pressure. That's going to make you're like arguing with somebody, you're asking for somebody's manager. It's not fun. It's not fun. If you're constantly seen as a terrorist, right, you're probably going to have more police checks. Police might be pulling you over a little bit more. You might be at risk of getting shot. There's so many different things that's going to affect your standard of living if you're seen as a terrorist, just because you're a Muslim man, for instance, right? So these experiences of how fear slides over some and sticks onto others and accumulating on them, these are the differences she's asking us to consider. Again, these are not absolutes, right? I don't want the not all crew be like, not all white men, not all Muslims, not all, like, we get it. We're not all. We get it. Thank you, not all police. We understand, not all. But in some cases, yes, all. I mean, not all, but most, some. What we find is that a passing and sliding by of fear, it orders white bodies hierarchically higher than racialized black and brown people. So now because your standard of living is higher, you might be more likely to get employed than if you're seen as a terrorist who's now not getting employed and now you're unemployed. So it creates these hierarchies. It places and organizes bodies, people, communities, individuals into a hierarchy, right? And you might fall some here on the hierarchy and somewhere else on the hierarchy compared to somebody else. In this scenario, the body with the most accumulation of fear is also marked as the body to be most feared. So if you are somebody who has so much fear in you, on you, around you, projected onto you, if you are seen as somebody people should be afraid of, if you are like a big, tall black man and everybody's locking their car doors when you walk by or clutching their purses, like you not only have more fear, but like you're also seen as somebody who should be feared. Sara Ahmed talks about this, Stuart Hall talks about this, Bell Hooks talks about this. they are viewed as suspicious. I don't know. They're viewed as suspicious. Some, black women who are seen as angry, for instance, might be seen as willful. There's a whole list of different stereotypes that get cast onto you. Even those with bodies that have the most fear, the assumption is that they should be the ones that are feared. This fearful gaze placed on racialized people, like black people, for instance, it means that we face undue challenges such as depression, deportation, violence and assault, criminalization, being put at higher risk of coming into contact with the prison industrial complex, the medical industrial complex, right? You might be, committed is not really a thing, but like you might find yourself being medicated against your will. All of a sudden, they're tranquilizing you now because you are feared. People are afraid of how you're responding. You might have a wellness check that ends in death because everybody is afraid of what you might do as a black person when you are in a state of disarray. And yet very little is actually known about these black and brown people, right? So like these asylum seekers, we don't, like a lot of white people might not necessarily interact with them on a daily basis. You might actually not know any black people. And yet your lived reality says that like black people are terrifying, they're bad, they're criminals, they're scary. But like you don't actually know that to be true because you're not, to be true for you. All you know is what you're hearing about in the media, what somebody's saying on social media, what this Facebook post says, that somebody did this. And like now these phobias that you have them, but like you haven't had them. Does that make sense? If not, go read these books and maybe they'll explain it better than I am doing right now. So Ramadan and Jeff Shantz, they share that phobia is associated with racialized people, with black people specifically, with brown people. They're not founded on any objective or factual truths, is what they're saying. They are based on imagined and perceived constructs that are fed through the media, who in turn benefit from these arrogance and ignorance and lack of knowledge. Again, you yourself have never really interacted with a lot of black people, and yet you think all of us are like monsters. That's what they're saying. That's not objective. That's your subjective. So Sara Ahmed also echoes this and says, the more we don't know who or what we fear, the more the world becomes fearful. So such unfounded assertions are what draw an accumulation of fear in and around black people. Not because they're innately flawed, not because we're more fearful than other people, but this distinction needs to be noted as black and brown bodies then tend to accumulate more fear for the most part. We're then shamed, we're victim blamed, we're condemned for being seen as these things that had nothing to do with us actually. So while it's passing over some people, it's sliding over them, they're being praised and glorified. And then in turn, black people kind of like are seen as behaving in a violent manner. Our actions are attributed to like some innate pathology on our part, which all has to do with anti-blackness, which is rooted in the idea that like black people or blackness is inherently violent and deviant, right? But like more on that later. So I hope that makes sense. This is a little bit long. I'm going to cut it short. Fear slides. It's an object. It's invisible. It's in the air. It's circulating. It moves over some people. People are swerving it. It's like sticking onto other people. Those that it's accumulating on the most, those are the people that we think are really scary, bad, ooh, terrorists, awful, abort, like leave them, criminalize them, medicate them, throw them in jail, deport them, send them away. They are taking over our country. And then those who it misses, they then tend to have a better quality of life. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, that's fine. Until next time, it's all.